the whispering halls in the small, unassuming town of Ravenswood, there stood an old, abandoned school known as Blackwood Academy. For decades, it had been the cornerstone of education, but a series of tragic events forced it to close its doors. The locals spoke in hushed tones about the school's dark past, about the children who vanished, and about the whispers that could still be heard echoing through its deserted halls. One chilly October evening, a group of curious high school students, eager for a thrill, decided to explore the decaying academy. Among them were Emily, Jack, Sarah, and Mark. They had heard the legends and were intrigued by the idea of uncovering the truth behind the rumors. Armed with flashlights and the sense of adventure, they made their way to the school. The building loomed large and foreboding, its once grand facade now crumbling and overtaken by ivy. The windows were shattered, and the doors hung loosely on their hinges. As they approached, a chill ran down Emily's spine, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "Are you sure about this?" Emily asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Don't be such a scaredy cat," Jack teased, though Ita felt a twinge of unease. "It's just an old building." With a deep breath, Emily pushed open the creaking door, and they stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and decay, and the floorboards groaned under their weight. Their flashlights cast long, eerie shadows on the walls, revealing faded posters and broken desks. "Look at this place," Sarah whispered. "It's like time just stopped." They wandered through the hallways, peering into classrooms and finding nothing but broken furniture and debris. As they ventured deeper into the school, the atmosphere grew heavier, and the temperature seemed to drop. "This is where they say the first child disappeared," Mark said, pointing to a classroom door with peeling paint. "Right in the middle of a lesson, he just vanished." They shuddered at the thought and moved on, each step amplifying their growing sense of dread. Suddenly, Emily stopped, straining to listen. "Do you hear that?" she asked. The others paused, and in the oppressive silence, they heard it too. A faint whispering, like a chorus of hushed voices. It seemed to be coming from all around them, echoing through the empty halls. "Let's keep moving," Jack suggested, trying to sound braver than he felt. They continued their exploration, following the whispers, which grew louder and more distinct. It led them to the heart of the school, to a door marked Principal's Office. The door was ajar, and a flickering light could be seen within. Taking a deep breath, Jack pushed the door open. The office was dimly lit by an old, malfunctioning lamp. Papers were strewn across the floor, and the walls were covered in cryptic symbols and writings. "Look at this," Sarah said, pointing to a diary on the desk. "It's the principal's diary." They gathered around as she opened it, and began to read aloud. October 15th, 1954. "The children, they speak of voices, of whispers that call to them from the walls. I dismissed it as imagination, but today, one of them vanished before my eyes. The walls, they are alive." As Sarah read, the whispers grew louder, almost deafening. The room seemed to close in on them, and the light flickered more violently. "We need to get out of here," Mark said, panic rising in his voice. But as they turned to leave, the door slammed shut, and the room plunged into darkness. Their flashlights flickered, and in the brief moments of light, they saw shadows moving, figures that shouldn't have been there. "The walls, they're moving," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible over the cacophony of whispers. The walls seemed to pulse and breathe, the symbols glowing faintly. The shadows coalesced into the form of a tall, imposing figure, the spectre of the principal, his eyes hollow and lifeless. "Why did you come here?" the spectre intoned, his voice a blend of the whispers that had plagued them. We were just curious," Jack stammered. "Curiosity has a price," the spectre replied. "You have disturbed the slumber of the restless. Now, you must join them." The room grew colder, and the whispers turned into a wailing chorus. The walls closed in further, and the floor seemed to melt away. The friends clung to each other, terror etched on their faces, in a desperate attempt to escape. Emily remembered the diary. She grabbed it and frantically flipped through the pages, finding a passage about a ritual to appease the spirits. "Everyone, hold hands," she commanded. "We need to say this together." With trembling voices, they recited the passage, the air around them crackling with energy. The shadows swirled violently, and the spectre's form flickered. "You cannot escape," the spectre hissed. "You are ours." But as they continued the incantation, the whispers began to fade, and the oppressive weight lifted. The room brightened, and the walls stopped moving. With one final, desperate push, they shouted the last words of the ritual, and the spectre let out an unearthly scream before dissipating into the air. The door swung open, and they stumbled out, gasping for breath. The whispers were gone, replaced by an eerie silence. They didn't stop running until they were far from the school, the first light of dawn breaking on the horizon. "Let's never speak of this again," Jack said, his face pale and drawn. Agreed. They made a pact to keep their harrowing experience a secret. But as they walked away, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed them, that the whispers had found a way into their minds. And as she lay in bed that night, she heard it, a faint, familiar whisper, calling her name from the darkness. Hash, 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 the haunting of Greyfield High *** Part 1. The beginning *** Greyfield High was an old school with a history as rich as its architecture. It was built in the early 1900s. Its red brick facade and towering clock tower a prominent landmark in a small town of Greyfield. However, beneath its grand exterior, Greyfield High harbored dark secrets and chilling tales passed down through generations. The most infamous story was about the ghost of a student named Alice Parker. According to legend, Alice was a brilliant and kind-hearted girl who mysteriously disappeared one stormy night in 1923. Despite extensive searches, her body was never found, and her disappearance remained an unsolved mystery. Over the years, students and teachers reported seeing Alice's ghost wandering the halls, her sorrowful eyes seeking answers. One rainy afternoon, a group of students decided to investigate the legend. Among them were Tom, Lisa, Brian, and Rachel. They had heard the stories and were eager to uncover the truth. Equipped with flashlights, a map of the school, and a sense of adventure, they waited until after school hours to begin their exploration. "Are we really doing this?" Lisa asked nervously as they gathered near the school's entrance. "Of course," Tom replied, trying to sound confident. "It's just a story. What's the worst that could happen?" As they entered the dimly lit hallways of Greyfield High, the atmosphere felt heavy, and the sound of their footsteps echoed eerily. The school seemed different at night, the shadows deeper and the silence more oppressive. They headed toward the old wing, where Alice was last seen. "This place gives me the creeps," Brian muttered, glancing around nervously. "Don't be such a baby," Rachel teased, though she, too, felt a chill in the air. They reached the old wing, its doors creaking open as if protesting their intrusion. The air inside was stale, and their flashlights revealed dust-covered desks and forgotten textbooks. The walls were adorned with faded photographs of former students and faculty, their eyes seemingly following the intruders. "Look at this," Lisa said, pointing to a dusty old diary she found in a drawer. "It's dated 1923. This might belong to Alice." They gathered around as Lisa opened the diary. The entries were typical of a high school student, detailing classes, friends, and crushes. But as they neared the final pages, the tone changed. Alice wrote about feeling watched, hearing whispers, and seeing shadows that moved on their own. "Listen to this," Lisa read aloud. "I'm so scared. The whispers are getting louder, and I feel like I'm being followed. I don't know who to trust anymore." A shiver ran down their spines as they realized Alice might have been in real danger. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and their breath became visible in the cold air. "Do you feel that?" Rachel asked, her voice trembling. Before anyone could respond, a soft sobbing sound filled the air. They turned toward the source and saw a faint, translucent figure standing at the end of the hallway. It was a girl in an old-fashioned dress, her face pale and eyes hollow. "It's Alice," Tom whispered, his voice barely audible. The ghostly figure began to move toward them, her sobs growing louder. Panic set in, and the group instinctively backed away. "We need to get out of here," Brian said urgently. But as they turned to leave, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The figure of Alice was now closer, her sorrowful eyes locked onto theirs. "Help me," she whispered, her voice echoing through the hall. "How?" Tom asked, his voice shaking. Alice pointed to a small, hidden door at the end of the hallway. It was partially obscured by a cabinet, and none of them had noticed it before. The group approached the door cautiously, pushing the cabinet aside. The door creaked open to reveal a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. "We have to follow her," Lisa said, mustering her courage. With no other options, they descended the staircase, their flashlights flickering in the darkness. The air grew colder as they went deeper, the smell of damp earth and decay growing stronger. At the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in an old, forgotten basement filled with broken furniture and cobwebs. In the center of the room was a large, wooden chest. Alice's ghost stood beside it, her eyes pleading. "Open it," she whispered. Tom knelt down and pried open the chest. Inside, they found old clothes, books, and personal items, but at the bottom, wrapped in a tattered blanket, was the skeletal remains of a young girl. "It's Alice," Rachel gasped, tears welling in her eyes. The realization hit them hard. Alice had been murdered and hidden away, her spirit trapped in the school, unable to find peace. As they stood there, the ghost of Alice began to fade, a look of gratitude on her face. "Thank you," she whispered before disappearing completely. The air in the basement grew warmer, and the oppressive feeling lifted. They knew they had done the right thing by uncovering Alice's fate. The group left the basement in silence, each lost in their thoughts. The next day, they reported their findings to the authorities. The discovery of Alice's remains solved a decades-old mystery, and her spirit was finally at rest. Grayfield High was never the same, but the legend of Alice Parker was laid to rest along with her. *** Part 2. The Shadows of Bellwood Elementary ** Years later, in another town not far from Grayfield, there was a small school, Bellwood Elementary. It was an unremarkable building, but it held a sinister secret known only to a few. The school had been built over the site of an old orphanage that burned down under mysterious circumstances. The spirits of the children who perished in the fire were said to haunt the grounds. Mrs. Thompson, the school's custodian, often spoke of strange occurrences, books falling off shelves, unexplained cold spots, and the faint sound of children laughing when the school was empty. Most dismissed her stories as the ramblings of an old woman, but a group of students, intrigued by the tales, decided to investigate. Among them were Emily, Jake, Sophie, and David. They were determined to uncover the truth behind the haunting of Bellwood Elementary. One Friday evening, after everyone had left, they snuck into the school with flashlights and a digital recorder. "This is going to be so cool," Jake said, trying to mask his nervousness with bravado. "I hope we find something," Sophie replied, her eyes wide with excitement. They began their investigation in the library, where Mrs. Thompson had reported seeing books fly off the shelves. The room was eerily quiet, the only sound being the hum of the air conditioning. They spread out, searching for any signs of paranormal activity. "Over here," David called out, pointing to a book that had fallen off a shelf. Emily picked it up and examined it. It was a children's book about a group of friends who lived in an orphanage. "This is weird," she said, flipping through the pages. "It's like someone wants us to read this." Just as she said that, the lights flickered, and the temperature dropped suddenly. The recorder in Jake's hand crackled to life, capturing faint whispers and giggles. "Did you hear that?" Jake asked, his eyes wide. "Yeah, it sounded like kids laughing," Sophie replied, her voice trembling. They decided to move to the gymnasium, where the custodian had reported seeing shadowy figures. As they entered the large, open space, their flashlights cast long, eerie shadows on the walls. The gym was silent, the echo of their footsteps the only sound. "Let's set up the recorder here," Emily suggested. They placed the recorder in the center of the gym and began asking questions, hoping to communicate with the spirits. "If there's anyone here, can you give us a sign?" Jake asked. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, faintly, they heard the sound of a basketball bouncing. They turned toward the source and saw a shadowy figure, the size of a small child, standing near the bleachers. "Who are you?" Sophie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The figure did not respond, but began to move toward them. As it approached, they could see it was a young boy, his clothes tattered and his eyes empty. "Help us," the boy whispered, his voice filled with sorrow. Before they could react, the gym door slammed shut, and the shadowy figure disappeared. Panic set in, and they ran to the doors, trying to open them, but they were locked. "We're trapped," David said, fear evident in his voice. "Stay calm," Emily urged. "Let's figure out what they want." They heard more whispers and turned to see several shadowy figures standing in a circle, holding hands. The children were dressed in old-fashioned clothes, their faces pale and eyes hollow. "They want us to help them," Sophie said, understanding dawning on her. "They're the children from the orphanage." Emily nodded. "We need to find out what's happened to them." They followed the figures as they led them to a small, hidden room near the gym. Inside, they found old documents and newspaper clippings detailing the fire that destroyed the orphanage. The fire was ruled an accident, but the children had been locked inside, unable to escape. "It wasn't an accident," Emily said, reading the articles. "Someone locked them in." As they uncovered the truth, the figures of the children began to fade, their expressions turning to ones of peace and gratitude. The temperature in the room rose, and the oppressive feeling lifted. "We